Chapter 5, Karma or Law of Cause and Effect. Karma derives from the Sanskrit krit and means due. The Hindu people are the ones who most use this word, considering it as the most appropriate technical term for designating action and its corresponding effect on the successive incarnations of spirit on earth. For them all action is karma. Any work or thought that produces a later effect is karma. It is the law of cause and effect, mirroring the creditor or debtor in the life of the incarnated spirit. Still within this understanding, the law of cause and effect records good and bad deeds. The law of karma, in turn, prepares the balance of these recorded actions and gives each person the result that fits it, whether positive or negative. In the metaphysical sense, the word karma refers to destiny traced and imponderable, which acts both in animate and inanimate things, since it governs and disciplines all cycles of life, from the finite to the infinite, from the atom to the planet and from man to the universe. Thus, it is understood that exists by esoteric tradition the karma of man, that of the family, that of the nation, that of the continent, that of humanity and others. Only in the light of true understanding can one give the necessary clarity to the history of karma. It begins very much like other religious principles on the face of the earth. The foundation of karma is closely analogous to other basic teachings of certain sects or religious groups which, in the end, try to keep people in a standard behavior capable of easily inducing them to proceed as a great flock. In this way, acting as it is determined to the group to which it belongs, the man is led by the ways that are imposed to him and never wears the objective of his life in the material world. In other words, free will is not respected, in the name of certain laws that are proclaimed emanating from the Creator. Karma, in fact, arose from an erroneous interpretation of the principle of causal energy. This energy is part of a set of 7 energies responsible for the existence of everything, including life in the physical and spiritual dimension. Causal energy, with its force, turns the wheel of life, giving rise to constant multiplication through reproduction. The incarnate man made, according to his understanding, an adaptation of the concept of this energy, transforming it into a law that came to rule among men. The spiritual leaders entrusted with the guidance of our humanity have all observed. Within the larger goal, it was allowed that erroneous understanding of causal energy to remain because it was useful. This law of karma, created by man, was useful in creating a more civilized behavior. From then on, religions and sects began to incorporate this principle of karma, either directly or subtly. Spiritism, in turn, has adapted this principle, incorporating it as the law of cause and effect, so well known to all of us. The very figure of sin in its essence keeps the law of karma, because as it teaches the doctrine of some religions, the sinner will be judged and can pay his sins in hell. It should be noted here that the free will of the incarnated man is respected by the higher entities in the moment of transmitting teachings or even allowing certain erroneous understandings to remain over time until the moment when human being can assimilate the true meaning of these teachings. But what interests us more closely, within Spiritist doctrine, is the law of cause and effect. It is present in all Spiritist literature, constituting an apology for pain and suffering. We understand that pain and suffering are exclusively material human ills, and as such, they have their origins in this life and its effects are enclosed here in material life. In this way, the balance of our acts is ended in our life and in this physical body. For future lives there are no faults to pay. Within this understanding, the claim that suffering is necessary to our evolution does not stand up to any logical argument. Suffering is a product of disease and must be banished from the earth. Supposing, for reasoning purposes, that suffering was necessary to man, we would have to know why we suffered. Otherwise we would never learn the lesson and we would always be judging ourselves wronged. In this respect it is common to hear statements that children pay for their parents. Within our understanding this is groundless when it comes to successive lives. What happens is that in the world of energy the most fragile can receive what is not addressed to him or her. In this way, the child can be affected by some suffering that was destined for the parents. This does not characterize a punishment of God, but only a result of actions among men in the material world. On the other hand, however, these account settlements that happen between men do not go beyond one life to achieve the next reincarnation. If that happened, the so-called rescue of past lives would be a fact. It is opportune, at the moment, to clarify a question. There are certain events of an incarnation that can only be undone in the body itself. It is not a question here of paying faults from other lives, but experiencing facts that have already occurred in other lives so that the person can understand them. The traumas that have occurred in our past lives are solved as we understand the facts that gave rise to them. It is the therapy of true understanding. In this regard, we cite the cases of heinous crimes taking place all around us. Our first reaction is to condemn the perpetrator of the crime, but we forget that in the past there have been barbarous massacres of people, like our Indians, who lost their bodies in the middle of terrible violence, causing them serious psychosomatic imbalances. They now return to the physical body as evil people because they keep these deleterious records until they can understand why they behave. Could we call this karma? No, because here there is no faults to pay, but rather, unbalanced records that need to be understood and eliminated its harmful effects. We understand that the adoption of the law of cause and effect by Spiritism has led to deviations from the true route that doctrine should follow. It was a small stop at some point in time to incorporate a concept already reigning at the time. But as nothing is lost, everything is taken advantage of. The concept was useful in the early days to compel man to meditate on his actions, to launch yourself in the mirror of the future and recognize that there was an obligation to change. The present was the time to plant the seed of this future. We see, therefore, that in general man improves his personal conduct not by the understanding that springs from the light of awakened consciousness, but simply by fear. Man is afraid that his actions contrary to the great concert of life can bring harmful consequences. Returning to our argument, the Spiritist doctrine in making this pause in time allowed man to arrive at his postulates, using his knowledge and understanding. Despite the apparent contradiction, this openness allowed man to accept the Spiritist presuppositions. Thus the law of cause and effect was added to Spiritism until the moment as man could dispense with it by a true understanding of the basic principles of doctrine. It is also important to remember that Spiritism has been influenced, as it could not fail to happen, by the religious culture enforced throughout its existence. It has even incorporated certain principles and rituals of contemporary religions. With the beginning of the diffusion of the doctrine through the literature, the man had access to abundant material containing the principles current Spiritists. The basic literature contains teachings on the spiritual world that perhaps were adequate to the understanding of the humanity of those times but that do not fit the man of today. Naturally, the human being had a great growth in their capacity to understand the spiritual world and the interconnection with matter. This leads us to conclude that Spiritism and its principles must adapt, through the change of language, to this man, the man of the atom age and interplanetary travel. The law of cause and effect, as a principle of Spiritism, needs to be revised to allow the human being, when he has access to his private records, this and other lives, not to count as losses many profitable experiences and not as debts for the future, facts that are actually only events circumscribed to the limits of the physical body. This law brings a point that in our view does not match the idea we have of the Creator. According to it, man is led to passively accept pain and suffering, failing to seek within himself the light of the understanding that leads to the conclusion that it is inconceivable that the father raised the child for suffering. The contrary, however, is easy to accept and clearly logical. The Creator created us to grow and be happy. If we are not so, it is due to the defects of our physical bodies that do not allow our access to the spiritual world and to ourselves. Therefore, the non-acceptance of this situation is of vital importance, for this means that we must fight with all our capacity until we reach the mastery of the body and then be lords of suffering and pain. According to the law of karma, Almost everything that happens to the man that is unfavorable to him is attributed to past factors, from birth in a home without the least comfort until the disincarnate in a situation of suffering can be classified as a rescue of past lives. In this respect, the question is, what is the point of punishing the criminal for a crime which he does not remember at all? Within our concept of justice, would that be fair? We understand that in the state of unconsciousness there is no guilty or false or even evil. We only know if we are acting according to the great reality of life when we have access to our records by self-consciousness. Mankind will still take a long time to get rid of the disease of sin that is the twin brother of karma. Again, it is good to remember that the Creator made us perfect and so we remain. It happens that at the moment we are using an imperfect body, which makes our perfection limited and subject to the imbalances of matter. Therefore, it is fundamental that we learn to distinguish we and our bodies, just as we cannot confuse the electric energy that produces light with the lamp that illuminates. The time has come for us to walk with Spiritism without fear, without self-censorship or even just for the purpose of pleasing people who live in the spirit world. Spiritism must be understood as a luminous bridge connecting the material and spiritual worlds. This path must be shared by all those who feel the need to participate in the spiritual homeland. This participation, this search for the connection with the other side of life must take place spontaneously and fulfill the longings of human being and never for the fear of debts or even to relieve pains of conscience. Anyway, it's the search for a new start, the search for access to this other frequency that completes us, comforts us and makes us feel again children of the Creator. We truly feel the need to remove from the back of man this heavy burden of guilt. By any suffering that he passes he is labeled as a debtor of the past. But what debt is this that so many speak and no one remembers? Was the debtor unconscious when he contracted it? Where will he be and who will be the lender? Was he also unconscious? Why he not explain to the debtor the origin of your debt? Well, if neither the debtor nor the creditor remember a debt then it does not exist. Continuing the line of thought, would the Creator be the creditor of our debts? Admitting this hypothesis would be the question, why would he choose the payment in the coin of pain and suffering? Had we been created by him to learn in the school of tears and lamentations? And why not in the college of laughter and happiness? As we can see, there are several questions that make the idea of the law of cause and effect ever more distant from the concept of justice and from the Creator. On the other hand, if we think of people with the reasoning mechanism impaired by a faulty brain, a poor energy collection system and a set of atrophied glands, we can even understand the origin of this law created by man himself in his image and likeness. Today Spiritism is heading in the opposite direction to its original path. It was created to break a yoke and re-establish the connection with the spiritual world. But what happens is the subjugation of incarnated man to rules, practices and rituals that do not clarify, but confuse, creating more doubts without answers. When he seeks the explanation or the foundation for a certain fact he does not find the clarifications he desires. As for unnecessary practices and rituals, people in the spiritual world say that it is time to work within reality and dispense with staging. The picturesque forms of spiritual interchange must be replaced by natural communication as it happens among the people incarnated in matter. The law of cause and effect, in turn, is a psychological sword on people's heads. For those who live in pain and suffering it is a straitjacket that avoids the people's reaction to change. At this point it is truly cruel, for it causes the incarnated person to lower his head and become accustomed to the pain, becoming a partner with all its harmful effects. Over time he becomes numb with suffering and forgets all his longings, his will to live and to realize, gradually transforming into an animal of diminished reasoning. This straitjacket placed on the animal man brings benefits to him, but it tastes like vinegar, similar to the case of the service animal that does not support the load and refuses to walk. When it feels the lash of the whip and the wound opens, it gathers strength and growl. When the wound heals the scar remains, showing that even the time cannot erase it. So it is with the human being who passes through the school of pain. He will forever keep in a dark compartment of his memory the record of suffering, but it would have been necessary suffering. Within the true understanding there can be no necessary suffering. If there is someone who thinks the opposite and submits to it, it is because prevails the imbalance of the faculty of reasoning. If mental sanity is absent, then physical organization is at the mercy of possible accidents in the long walk of life. Spiritism cannot exchange the wheat for the chaff. Its biggest principle must be the truth illuminated by the light of reason. In the same way, understanding must always be the guardian of man so that suffering and pain do not come to dwell with him. Related topics. 1. What do spirits gain by having followed the right road, since they are not thereby exempted from the pains of corporeal life? Spirits Book. They arrive more quickly at the goal, and besides, the sufferings of life are often a consequence of the imperfection of the spirit. Therefore, the fewer his imperfections, the less will be his sufferings. Comment. Starting from the assumption that we are created perfect and the Creator sees no defects in his work, everything is experience, and if deviations occur we must credit this not to the driver, but to the driven vehicle. The so-called penalties are natural consequences of the acts practiced within the state of unconsciousness. It is not, therefore, an imperfection of the spirit, but a defect of matter. 2. In the state of erraticity, and before taking on a new corporeal existence, does a spirit foresee the things which will happen to him in that new existence? Spirit's Book. He chooses for himself the kind of trials which he will undergo, and it is in this freedom of choice that his free will consists. Comment. The spirit chooses and traces his life project and thinks that everything will go as planned. He even thinks that he will be able to solve all the problems that surround his future physical body. But as he plunges into the physical environment he gradually forgets everything he knew before, including what he had planned for his existence. This oblivion is so deep that it causes man to become unconsciousness, not remembering, from there, nothing more of his past and his planning for the future. 3. How can a spirit choose to be born among those who are leading a bad life? Spirit's Book. It is necessary for him to be sent into the conditions which will furnish the elements of the trial he has demanded. To this end, there must be a correspondence between the imperfection of which he desires to free himself, and the social surroundings into which he is born. For example, if he have to struggle against the instinct of brigandage, it is necessary for him to be thrown among brigands. Comment. As was said earlier, in planning or adjusting certain conditions of life, the spirit thinks that he will be able to solve everything, but what happens in general is his failure before the force that governs the physical world. If he chose to live among people of evil lives, it was because this experience was important to him, but not as proof. 4. If, then, there were no evil livers upon the earth, spirits could not find in it the conditions necessary to certain kinds of trial. Spirit's Book. Would there be any reason for complaining? If such were the case you suppose is that of the worlds of higher order, to which evil has no access, and which are therefore inhabited only by good spirits. Try to bring about such a state of things as soon as possible in your earth. Comment. Spirits do not incarnate to pay for their faults or to submit to trials, but to seek new experiences, in order to make concrete their life goals. In the worlds where people are conscious, evil simply does not exist, which concludes that the so-called evil has its origin in human unconsciousness. 5. Do spirits make their choice of the new existence immediately after death? Spirit's Book. No, many of them believe their sufferings to be eternal. You have already been told that this is a chastisement. Comment. It depends on the level of consciousness when leaving the physical body. If it occurs traumatically, causing a state of deep unconsciousness, he will have a longer recovery time. On the contrary, if the loss of the physical body occurred without great traumas, in a way that did not cause great loss of consciousness, he will be easier to position himself in relation to his future life. 6. What is the cause of the vocations of some persons, and their spontaneous desire to follow one career rather than another? Spirit's Book. It seems to me that you yourselves might answer this question. Is not the existence of such vocations a necessary consequence of what we have told you concerning the choice of trials, and of the progress accomplished in a preceding existence? Commentary. The activities developed by the Spirit in past lives and of which he likes insinuate themselves into future lives in the form of a desire to be involved with them. Sometimes this desire is so strong that he gives up promising careers to engage in another seemingly unattractive activity. 7. What is the aim of Providence in creating beings so ill-treated by nature as idiots? Spirit's Book. Idiots are incarnations of spirits who are undergoing punishment, and who suffer from the constraint they experience, and from their inability to manifest themselves by means of organs which are undeveloped, or out of order. Comment. The Creator does not actually create imperfect beings and his work is all perfect. The cases that we know of people who fit the human concept of exceptional are due to defects of bodies from the genetic combination or to other cases of diverse pathogenesis. The Spirit, when realizing that the physical body in which he is going to reincarnate presents a serious problem, he thinks that he can give solution to the defect. However, by taking on this body he is faced with a situation that is beyond his capabilities, because he soon plunges into unconsciousness and forgets everything.